What's going on, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Fulton's Music Reviews. Well, 2012 proved to be quite a tremendous year for music, especially in the worlds of progressive rock and heavy metal music. And although we are here in the final stretch here in the month of December, it's a shame that there are still certain bands and certain albums that have gone a tad bit unnoticed. Bands and albums that are definitely worth being talked about. Tonight we're going to be talking about one of those bands and one of those albums. So sit back and relax as we dive into the self-titled debut full-length release from Theorem. Now, to those who are unfamiliar with Theorem and their work, and I'm assuming it's probably quite a number of you out there, they are a four-piece progressive rock band from the Ontario area of Canada. And since they are rather local Canadian acts, I wouldn't have even known about them had it not been from a buddy of mine from Ontario showing me them earlier this year. So a huge shout out and a huge thanks to you, Johnny. Now, Theorem are a band of pretty young dudes, all of them being in their early 20s from what I've heard, and a band that is completely self-promoted and self-produced, so quite a lot of props to them for that. And this is a band who have toured quite extensively over the last few years in their native Canada, getting their name out there and sharing their wonderful music with the world. But this is a band who have toured without having a full-length record, and this was something that was many years in the making, and 2012 finally saw the release of this debut full-length, so let's dive into what makes this album so damn good. Now, the first thing about this album that is worth talking about is the incredible musicianship that this band has to offer. And it only makes it all the more impressive knowing how young they are. Now, Theorem are a band with a laundry list of amazing musical influences, ranging from classic progressive rock bands such as Pink Floyd, Rush, Genesis, Yes, to more modern progressive metal acts such as Dream Theater and Symphony X, and even some influence from classic heavy metal bands such as Pantera. Now, this is a band who has clearly spent many years learning the styles and techniques of some of their favorite players, whether it be drums, bass, guitar, keyboards, and a band who is clearly not ashamed or hesitant to let these musical influences shine forth in their playing and in their songwriting. But the way it comes out is a way that doesn't sound corny. In fact, it's quite a revitalizing sound in the way that they're able to blend and amalgamate all of these musical influences into their songcraft. And this is something that is quite remarkable and quite inspiring, if you ask me, to see and hear, especially in the year of 2012, considering that some of these musical influences, by general consensus, are considered a tad bit outdated. Another positive about this record that is worth talking about is the fact that this is quite a mammoth release for a debut album. Now, this is something that might be a little bit misleading at first glance, considering that this album is only 5 tracks in length. But in reality, this is an album that contains over 60 minutes of music. In fact, I think it's closer to 65 minutes of music. And although this album might be quite lengthy to some, this is an album that contains quite a bit of actual music as well. And what I mean by that is that a lot of these tracks contain very little vocals, which means that each member of this band has quite a bit of time to shine in terms of their instrumental ability on these tracks. Each track seems to tell a story of its own, and musically and lyrically, they are its own separate animal. And this only becomes more and more apparent with the final closing track on the album, The Dream, which clocks in at nearly 30 minutes in length. This is something that was extremely ballsy and extremely righteous, but something that I have to give this band an extreme amount of credit for. One last positive about this album that is worth talking about, which sort of goes hand in hand with the first point that I made, is that this is an incredibly honest record. Theorem are obviously not a band who are trying to fit in, and are clearly a band who are making music that they want to make, and making music because that's what they love to do, and that's what they want to do. And this is something that comes across extremely well, and something that is extremely inspiring to see, as I mentioned before. Being a fresh new band on the rise, working with some archaic tools, I gotta say, Theorem are a successful modern take on the classic progressive rock style. Now, although I just talked a few minutes about the positives of this record, that doesn't mean that it goes without its flaws either. And taking a look at this album in a more critical way, one of the first things that might become apparent as a minor flaw of this album are the vocals. Now, to some, these vocals might come off as a little bit amateur, a little bit weak. But let me just kind of rebut that just a little bit. It sort of goes along with the last point that I made about this being a very honest record. This is a band who share the vocal duties, 3 out of the 4 of them that is, amongst themselves. And this is something that I think comes across extremely well. Major points for their effort here, because this is a band who could clearly get a full-time vocalist if they really wanted to, but they chose not to, because each one of these members have quite unique vocal styles, which only adds to the musical dimensions of all of these songs, especially in the final closing track, The Dream. I will admit that the vocals to me were a little bit hard to digest at first, but after multiple listens, this is something that I really grew to enjoy about this record, because it only just continues to show the honesty that this band has. Another criticism that could be made towards this album would be in regards to its production. Now, I think it's important to reiterate the point that this is an unsigned band. This is a band that is completely self-promoted and completely self-produced. So although the album might sound a little bit unbalanced at times, there might be a couple of occasions where the drums sound a little bit clunky, the guitars might sound a little bit loud, or even at times a little bit buried, that's okay, and I'll tell you why. There's something very genuine about the sound of this record, because it sounds very live. As I said, this is a band that made their mark and sort of made their name being a live band before releasing this. So having it sound very live is something that I think is the best thing about this album, because it just proves once again how honest they are. I don't know if this album was actually recorded in a live setting, but to me, it sounds live, and I think that's one of the best things about it. All too often these days we hear bands just sounding way too overproduced and just way too larger than life. And then when you see them live, they just come off as really dull and really flat. Pyramid Theorem are definitely not one of those bands. In fact, Pyramid Theorem might be one of those bands who sound even better live. You make the call on that one. But in terms of what you're actually hearing on this record, very genuine, live, raw energy. And I feel like that's something that a lot of bands are too afraid to do these days, because it might come across as very unpolished. But you know what? That doesn't really matter. I feel like that's something that bands should strive to do more these days, just like the progressive rock bands of the past. Pyramid Theorem seem to be one of those bands with the philosophy of what you see is what you get. Or rather, what you hear is what you get. And to me, what I'm getting here is a very genuine, live, raw energy. Something that I feel a lot more bands should aspire to be like. So although some people might consider the production to be a low point of this album, I think it's something that should be rather inspiring. But regardless of how you choose to look at it, this is a very genuine and honest sounding record, and a very genuine and honest sounding band. So overall, this is a debut release with fantastic musicianship, songcraft that the band obviously took a lot of time and care to craft these songs, and a band who was absolutely on the rise here in 2012. They just released a brand new music video for one of their tracks called Another Day Slips By, which I will be leaving in the description box below. Definitely something that you should all check out. This is a band who's not exactly reinventing the wheel here, but a band who has successfully crafted a very modern take and a very great take on the classic progressive rock style. This is a record that I cannot recommend enough, especially to fans of progressive rock. If you want to buy this album, it is digitally available on iTunes, and if you want to pick up a hard copy for yourself, you can do so from the band's personal website. I will be providing the links to all of that information below. And as an overall grade, I gotta give this album a solid 8.75 out of 10, which, for an unsigned band releasing a debut full-length record, that is pretty damn high, I gotta say. And until next time, thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you next time with another review. Take care.